because of the focus and sort of the navel gazing onto money, we tend to forget other mechanisms that can enable researchers to benefit fully in the open access discussion. It does not mean, or I'm not trying to take away the importance or the usefulness that the money aspect also has, because yes, and it's one of the problems. I think in a way, not considering other problems, we will run the risk of maybe solving the money issue only to realize that open access is still not open access for those who need to participate, because the other aspects and factors that can help them to participate are not in place. So we start from square one again.
Welcome to Insights Exchange, where we explore the crossroads of ideas, research, and societal impact. I'm your host, Nikesh Gosalia. Here's an interesting fact. Did you know that DEI principles, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, were originally inspired by movements aimed at making workplace more inclusive, but have now found resonance in research and academia as key to shaping a more equitable world of knowledge sharing? This brings us to today's topic. How can we meaningfully integrate not just DEI, but there's justice, and so the DEI-J principles into the open access framework? With Open Access Week 2024's theme of community over commercialization, the conversation around open access is moving beyond financial concerns to deeper issues of equity and inclusion. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Godwyns Onwuchekwa, a passionate advocate for social justice. Godwyns has been actively involved in challenging structures that hinder diversity and inclusion within the research community and broader societal contexts. With his expertise, we'll dive into how the JEDI principles can become a cornerstone of the open access movement. Since the first time that I met Godwyns, we immediately had a fantastic connect. And I remember we met at the ALPSP conference a couple of years back. And since then, I've been meaning to have a more detailed conversation with you. So welcome today, Godwyn.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So let's start with the theme for Open Access Week 2024 is community over commercialization. I know when we invited you on as a guest, you were excited because you feel like usually discussions around open access only revolve around money. But there are other issues, particularly diversity, equity, inclusiveness, justice, that are overshadowed. Can you share your views on this?
Thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. I must say the conversation that is ongoing around open access, and especially from the perspective of equity, is quite useful. It's good to see that these are happening. It also helps because when we have this discussion, it helps to highlight other neglected issues that are just lurking in the corners. So, but my interest in the discussion is that we should have a more robust, comprehensive discussion. The reason I constantly highlight that the focus being on money is not useful is because there are other factors that are very critical for stakeholders who should participate and who should be part of the open access movement and benefit from it. But because of the focus and sort of the navel gazing onto money, and that usually boils down to ABC, we tend to forget other mechanisms that can enable researchers to benefit fully in the open access discussion. So that is one of the reasons that I highlight that. It does not mean, or I'm not trying to take away the importance or the usefulness that the money aspect also has, because yes, and it's one of the problems. I think in a way, not considering other problems, we will run the risk of maybe solving the money issue only to realize that open access is still not open access for those who need to participate, because the other aspects that and factors that can help them to participate are not in place. So we start from square one again. So that's the reason I think about it in that way. There are many issues that are there, especially on the infrastructure front. that certain communities, especially underrepresented communities, do not have access to these things, infrastructures that can help them. There are also things like inequity in how we collaborate. If researchers do not have this level of access to collaborate, then they cannot fully contribute into OA. So that is where I'm coming from in this discussion.
Thank you. No, I fully agree with you. So from your perspective, how can we ensure that justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion are prioritized as foundational values within the open access movement?
Well, like I said, if you take all the other various facets of this discussion into consideration and approach them equally to solve them, then you'll be addressing the issues of equity. Now, the starting point is that many times frameworks and principles are set, but not by the whole stakeholders. Those who are setting it are different from those who it is targeted at. And then you find that eventually these frameworks do not really serve the purpose, albeit well-meaning, but they do not end up serving the purpose that they were set out to achieve. And that is because the diversity of the decision makers was not inclusive, therefore it's not representative. And if those representations are missing from those discussions, you will not get the full context and the nuance will not be there. So you run the risk of making principles and policies that do not address the real issues on the ground. To ensure that equity and diversity and inclusion involved in what is being done, it is a practical step. First of them is to include everyone, to make sure that when we form committees or work groups or whatever you call them, that the people that are involved in them are those people who should represent the various different communities, especially geographically. This is quite important because geographic context and history and style and approach differs a lot. What we tend to see, and this is where the justice and equity comes into it, is that sometimes particular geographical areas hold sway. And in holding sway, they consider that anything coming from the other geographical context are not of value, are not regarded as being useful. And it means that if that is happening, the decision you make is geared towards a particular area. So the bias is quite, glaring, although people don't tend to see it. So to improve things, you have to involve everyone. Now, that involving will lead to diversity. One of the problems of not achieving equity when we try the inclusion and the diversity is that those included are just there as a tick box. So the voices are not being taken on an equitable terms. What they are saying doesn't have the same value as what the other person is saying. And once you start doing that, then it's not equitable. There is no justice in it. So you end up again, even though you have included people, they look diverse, but the output doesn't quite represent it. That's because the resources that would enable those to participate. And I think this is why I mentioned the issue of geography, because the resources we have to participate in certain things are not the same. When you consider that basic things as simple as internet connection can be a problem, a hindrance to participation, and then you include those who have these particular basic issues in a meeting or a committee or a working group, but their participation is limited by what they can do. And nobody makes the effort to create the time to say, can we have a chat, particularly about what you were going to contribute or what you could contribute? It's then seen that, well, the meeting was set up, they attended, but we couldn't hear them. So whatever they were saying is missed out. And then the box could be ticked as it was inclusive. It's diverse. We have people from A, B, and C, and D. But actually, the output is only from A. So this is the point I'm making about if we want to have equity in real terms, we need to take better steps, proactive steps. And, in my line of work, my history of work in social justice and social community, that the term hard to reach is not justified. You can reach anyone. You just need to try harder. It should not be on those people that you want to reach. It should be you who makes the effort to reach them. So this is the aspect I'm coming from.
Fantastic. And, maybe I should have asked this before, Godwyns, but just since you mentioned that you spent a lot of your time, effort in talking about, these kind of issues, could you briefly talk about your journey? How has it shaped? What are you currently involved in? How you've become so passionate about it?
The first thing I would say, I still consider myself new in this industry. Some people will argue against that. But actually, I'm just itching towards my 4th year in this industry. But prior to that, I have worked in social communities for social justice. I would say informally since I was a teenager, campaigning is something that just get baked into me somehow. Standing up against injustice has been something that I did right from when I could, have memory. I would be able to challenge things. But, formally, it led me to a path that I worked within the UK public health system, working mostly within non-profits and community work on sexual health, HIV, and LGBT rights. In that environment, you find out that to get the contribution of those who are at the receiving end of policies, you need to hear their voices. So that has, become a mechanism that got me into working, including becoming a patient advocate, where I worked with a lot of hospitals and university teaching hospitals and public health policymakers, local authorities, UK, to discuss how we can improve policies so that they are reflecting what the practice should be, but also in commissioning services that users need to use. So those are, sort of the part of my history. And it means that in those instances, I have to run groups for users to be able to contribute and then act as a middle person to work with policymakers. And also worked in various non-voluntary organizations who were doing amazing campaigns. I worked along them. I work in some of them, the African HIV Policy Network, the Terrence Higgins Trust, worked with the NAS Foundation, and all of those organizations. So beyond that, I went on to eventually at some point set up a campaigning organization itself called Justice for Gay Africans. And we campaigned around the Commonwealth issues of discrimination towards LGBT people in Africa mostly, and in the Commonwealth generally. And those are part of the steps. I eventually was working for myself as a community engagement specialist, working with local authorities in the UK to help them to, develop services that really talk to the real issues. And the way to do that is that I then have to work with these users to help to build a package of what they need so that the local authorities can themselves commission these services. So it's a long line of, and this dates back to nearly 20 years now. I'm not quite as young as I look, but yeah, I've been around. And then I eventually also managed a grant-making organization in the Netherlands, Planet Romeo Foundation. And it's one of the work I did that I'm very proud of because it gave me further access to engage with groups across the world who are working to help LGBT people in various communities from east to west, from north to south. And that was, very insightful thing to do. And it was from there that I then ended up in publishing. One of the things that shocked me, I worked in the science part of it. So I work for eLife Sciences. I'm the head of communities at eLife Sciences. It's a job that gives me a lot of satisfaction because I have the opportunity and the agency to do things that can help. What I find quite debilitating is to realize that even in science, that you still find a lot of bias, like very open, very obvious. And scientists themselves don't tend to, realize it. So this shocked me. It shocked me to the bones because I couldn't believe, because I thought that scientists believed in facts, in research, in experiments. But to find that even within this, sphere, that there are many underrepresented communities who are not being, supported in the way they should be. And this is not a matter of East and West this time. It's not a matter of North and South. Even within this Western echo chamber that we are, there are people within that who do not have the level of access they can have. It can go to simple things as being able to intern, to getting a job on a board. And if you don't have enough resources to fund yourself to do certain things, then you don't develop the skills. Then you don't have the CV to compete with your peers. So this shocked me that it's happening within science. And this is what probably pushes me further. But thank, goodness, I work in an organization that believes that we can do this. And I happen to be part of doing that. So in a way, I'm happy that I can do it. But the challenges are enormous. And I think eLife alone cannot do it, but we're doing our little best.
No, absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that. Very inspirational, Godwyns. And I fully agree with you. I think a lot of people have to join hands and solve this. But it starts with creating a platform for us to talk about this, to express, to highlight the gravity of, the situation. And that's what you're aiming to do. And, people like me are also inspired by that. So hopefully, we can bring more people and create that awareness. Going back to the publishing aspect, there is a growing tension between commercial open access platforms and community-driven non-commercial initiatives. In your opinion, how can we strike a balance to ensure that open science remains a tool for empowerment rather than being co-opted as a commercial product?
The discussion that usually happened, or the tussle between commercial and not-for-profit, they are, things I sometimes consider as a distraction. It is a distraction because both commercial and non-commercial can coexist, peacefully and collaboratively and complementarily to each other. The concern sometimes is that there is a lot of denial sometimes, and some of the issues are swept under the carpet or pushed behind. For example, the issue of profits. It's good to make profits. I think if people invest, they should make profit. However, in the discussion to enable things like open access, things that are much more community focused to equip everyone towards achieving the same thing, in that discussion, there tend to be a sort of hidden away issue where people are not being frank that, their profit matters. And we know it matters, but by not bringing it onto the table and having that discussion, you put it to the side, it eventually destroys whatever was discussed beforehand. So that is one aspect. But I think that put together, there is a place for both commercial and non-commercial. There is a place for that. Because in the end, even though I said we have to not talk so much about money, we cannot discount the role that money plays in everything and the importance of it. A famous saying goes that the love of money is evil. And it's that problem of the focus on that money, on how can I make more of it, more and more and more of it. It's not the fact that you're making money. So this is what distracts from it. And from my perspective, I don't think that we should abolish everything commercial, whatever. I think that the focus again should be on the need that is being solved and who the needs relates to, and get their voice and not see them as a fodder or a data to be churned and create more money. So including these voices can help without being worried that, if we bring them in, we're going to dilute our profits or not make more of it. So those underlying problems, they remain, the issues. That actually leads to lack of vision, because we are not seeing beyond the immediate gains that we want to make. But even though we claim there's a vision, the vision is not being followed. It's not quite a vision anyway, because it doesn't see far beyond what our individual states are. And that takes away from it. So it's not a big deal if you ask me. I think there's a need for both to coexist. And if they can complement each other, that would be useful for everyone.
Got it. Absolutely. And from your perspective, what role does open access play in amplifying marginalized voices? And how can we ensure that research from these communities is not only visible, but also respected and integrated into mainstream academic discourse?
Well, let me actually go back and say, when we talk about, money as one problem that is trying to be addressed, the other issues that I always think are not being addressed is things like infrastructure, things like publication barriers, things like collaboration, equitable collaboration, or inequality in collaboration, and of course, funding in general. Now, why did I mention funding even when I've talked about money? Is because in OA, the discussion tends to be so much about APC and how we fund publication cost. So when you look at those issues in their own strands, you find that if we don't address them one by one and find a solution to it, then open access is not going to be real open access, and it's not going to play any role, because these issues affect mostly those marginalized communities. And if it's marginalizing them, even if you say, let's take the APC, the most common discussed one. Let's take that, for example. With that is now attached a thing called waiver. So even if you give them waiver, you find that it creates even a psychological impact on them, where they feel like second-class citizens. They have to beg for these things. And some organizations has not even made a good effort to make accessing the waivers easy. It's almost like jumping through hoops. You have to beg for it. You have to do this and that. So in eLife, I'm proud to say that. And I think we need to do more in eLife. But you ask for waiver, you get 100% waiver. And you don't need to jump through hoops. All you need to do is ask for it. And I think there's more we can do. But that is a place we are that I'm very happy with. But sometimes I see that, what I hear from researchers, my job gives me the opportunity to work with researchers from across the globe. You nail it, from east to west. What you find that is sometimes receiving that waiver can be another work in itself. So that's one side. Now, that is the side of APC, but in funding generally, there is inequity, a huge one. I think many people has done so many studies and research. The BMJ has done one, which they call something like the trickle-down economy in the title or something like that. Many other people has done one. All of them showing almost the same thing, that the access researchers from the global south has, or low and middle income communities has, you find that they are less likely to receive a funding that their peers in the global north can't receive. So there is that. But then there are some funding that are not accessible to them at all. But beyond that, there are some funding that, or not so many funding that those who make the decision on the funding don't have the context that these people are coming from. And that again goes back to the issue of inclusion and diversity. So if you have a group of people who make decisions on a wider group of people that they have no lived experience, they do not understand their context, they are not exposed to how they do things, then you find that the decisions will not be as useful and it will not be beneficial. And again, it's fine to say that, people make decisions based on what they know. And that's the point. It doesn't mean that they generally maybe deliberately want to discriminate against these people. But I recently finished a course by Professor Mazarin Banerjee on outsmarting implicit bias. People don't realize that their bias contributes, and that bias is fed in because of the way they have related or what they have been able to relate to in their life. Sometimes it is not their fault. It's not your fault that you've not lived in, let's say, in Bangladesh. It's not your fault that you've not lived in South Africa. It's not your fault that you've not lived in China. it is not your fault. But if you have not been able to be relating to people from there, you may not be able to understand their context when they give you an access of what is going on. So in funding, this is one of the things that probably influence it. So they don't have the same level of funding. They don't get this funding when they apply. It's difficult for them to get. Then we can go to the issue of inequity in collaboration. If researchers are not able to collaborate internationally because of whatever it may be, then you find that open access will not help them. If you get your research set up, but you cannot collaborate, because collaboration is also about the diversity of inputs that will come into it. And you don't have an exposure to you don't have access to this international collaboration, participation in some global networks. Then what is open access? It wouldn't benefit you. But we can go further to say that this contributes to the point that the research that are being curated, that are being reviewed, that are being published, are all in one part of the world, from one part of the world. So is it really open? It's open just for those who are being put into the basket, not those who are outside of it. So that is the other. So open access is also not helping in that way. The publication barrier, we've talked about that, the fact that even submitting your articles, because you're from certain parts of the world, the moment you dreamt about submitting it, you already face the hurdles. There is, plentiful to count from. It could be from resources, not having the right tools, internet, computers, this and that, softwares and all of that. But beyond that, when you eventually crack through all this one that are potentially within your own power because you need to produce them, and then you get to submit it, how is it looked at? I met you at a conference talking to various people in various conferences and meetings. Someone has once said to me, why are you guys doing all this diversity thing? Why are you all spending time talking to just people in the global side? I said, diversity is not about that. And another person said to me, well, the thing is, if I take a paper that comes from Senegal, I don't really understand what they're talking about. And I said, and what do you do? And this person is a very senior person who is an editor somewhere. He said, well, I don't get it. I don't know this. So there's no need for me to do it. So sometimes you realize that people are being rejected simply because someone doesn't understand what they say. I spoke to the eminent, lovely Dr. Paddy Johnson. He's a Ghanaian that I've met, have the, privilege of engaging with. And he explained how sometimes some editors don't really understand the intricacies of the research that are coming from certain parts of the world that they are not keyed into. So if this is happening, it means that the body of work that is out there, the record of scientific work or any other field, the research that we put out there does not include a diverse voice. The input is not as diverse as it can be. If this is happening, what open access is that? It will be open access, but when you are accessing it, well, we've talked about the access not being there anyway. But open access is not just being able to access, it's also about what you are accessing, what makes up the whole body of work that you are accessing. So there is a need to think about when we think that open access is going to improve contribution by marginalized communities. It's a well-meaning thought. It's good to think that way, but it is not going to happen unless those barriers are addressed equally. But addressing them means including those who we are talking about. And that is what justice will be. Sorry, I went a long way to come down today.
No, but I think that's you've covered some fantastic points, Godwyns. And just while you were talking, I know you've shared a couple of very specific practical steps a lot of the other stakeholders can take. Are there other practical steps that institutions or publishers, even researchers can take to democratize open access further and move beyond the transactional models that favor maybe more well-sourced institutions or researchers, like you said?
Well, I think it goes back to the point that the point of open access is not going to be achieved unless every hand is on deck. There is, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but there is no central body that can impose it on everyone and say that's what you must do. Maybe there could be, the American Nelson memo was useful, but again, that is something from one country. Perhaps, again, the same point we're talking of, it's a good thing, but does it address all the problems everyone faces? No, it doesn't. So governments or institutions or organizations or publishers and academic institutions, policymakers all can play a role. It's the aspect of realizing that every little helps is what needs to ginger up everyone to do something. So in eLife, we've been taking steps. For example, in 2021, we did an open call to targeted communities to join our editorial board. So we recruited editors from Latin America only. And that is to say, you need to involve these people who are part of the wider stakeholders. We repeated the same thing, targeting editors from Africa, and recruited another group of people. So these are some of the steps that sometimes, unless someone sits back and think, you realize that although it's very small, it's one publisher. Imagine if every, and I'm being too optimistic here, every publishing house does that and diversify, make their editorial decision makers, make them more diverse. Now, this is the upper layer. Other things you can do. Again, as head of communities in eLife, we run various programs to support researchers from across the globe. Now, you may want to recruit editors from certain places into your editorial board. That is good. It's a good step. But when you think of it, how skilled, equipped are the communities you're targeting? So the layer below that is, what are we doing to upskill these communities who we know do not have the access? You may want to go to your board of directors and add people from other places. But what are you doing? How are you going to find them? Right? If we are not providing access, a member of our early career advisory group wrote an article that was released yesterday giving his perspective from Morocco and the struggle he faces. And one of the things he narrated there, which is not a new thing, is his abstract being accepted for a conference in the UK, but he was refused visa to travel to UK to do this. And you and I attended conference recently. We know there are people who couldn't attend the conference because they were not granted the visas. So these are all of the very separate steps that needs to be addressed. And I've heard from various even researchers from the global south who can tell you how difficult it is for them to get through anything. So organizations and governments and everyone can play a role by considering very small steps that can be taken. So from where I see it from in eLife, this is why I say I'm proud to work in this organization. We're taking those steps. We run a program we call the Ambassador Program. We recruit over 100 researchers from across the world, specifically focused on giving them training and capacity building, helping them to build networks because they come from across the world. The last batch we had was from over 50 countries. So it enables them to talk to people they wouldn't have talked to before, to find ways to collaborate. But we provide training for the first 10 months of that program. We run trainings going from reproducibility to leadership to peer reviewing. We just do all those trainings for them. It might look or seem very small. What you're doing, what we are trying to do is to see that all those underrepresented communities are being equipped with the same thing that their peers who don't have to struggle for this are getting, to it in the past and up till now, to join a board of reviewing editors. Most of the time it's true what I call nepotism. People refer or identify people they know and work with. There's nothing wrong in knowing someone. I know you. I'm more likely to recommend you for something because I know your character, I know your output. but sometimes that limits participation. So by not doing that, we keep people outside all the time. And then you find that those researchers who know someone who then brings them along to review their paper, to coach them through it, are the people who end up being the editors, and they are all from one place. So by running all of this training, we're upskilling people to be able to say, I can do this. And we've gone further to say we opened something we call Early Career Reviewers Pool that provides a space for early career researchers to participate in reviewing. They join it, our editors can pick from there to join them in reviewing. They take part in that, and it builds up their own CV to be able to take part in the future. So it's not quite enough to say, well, we want to recruit, make our board diverse, but you should think about how are we supporting these communities to build up so they can have equivalent CVs with their peers. Because if I apply for a job that I'm not qualified for, even though I'm a black guy, you will not take me because you think, oh, he's not good, right? That's it. But if you equip me so that I'm able to apply to that job, I can compete on a very equal basis with those who are applying for it, then you get it. So I've been in a meeting where someone said, oh, the problem with, targeting to find these people is that it's so difficult to find someone with the skills. And I thought, well, that's true. It's difficult to find someone with the skills because if you're from a well-to-do family, connected and everything, and you finish uni, your father talks to the other father or your mother talks to the other mother, and you get a call, you come and join, you start doing the job. And before you know it, you're getting promoted, you're learning the job. If you're not, no, you can't. If nobody makes a phone call, your parents call the other person, say, oh, come and start as an intern. You go there, you're building skills because nobody in the university teaches you how to do an everyday job. But you're there. And then I finish uni with you, but you're the one who got to do the intern. I may be offered the same internship, but if I don't have money to pay my rent, to travel there, internship is free, to do everything I need to do, then I will never get there. I will not take it up. So I'm busy looking for a job, but my mate has gone to do internship as if it's free, but they have money supporting them. So we need to learn that to democratize things, people need to be equipped, people need to be upskilled to be able to participate in that democratization. And the democratization will be real and practical if those people who are part of it knows what is going on, not just there as a number.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. Maybe two parts to this question. Are there any specific policies or frameworks that you would suggest for integrating justice, equity, diversity, inclusiveness, and its principles into open access publishing? And if we are able to implement all of this, what impact do you foresee this would have in terms of systematically integrating into the OA framework?
There aren't any particular framework I'm going to, suggest, or course, there are many out there. Many has been, produced and launched, for various different stakeholders. I think the latest one I was privileged to encounter was the one launched, the How Equitable Is It? That was launched at the OASPA conference in September. But there are various other ones. There are many other attempts that has been made. I mean, the thing with the How Equitable Is It is, I have to ask the question. I see that there are various people who are involved in it, but it was targeted at organizations and publishers, not at individuals. So that is all right. The Western Central African Research Network has also done some work focusing in their area. So there are various, pieces of work going on here and there. OASPA itself did a collection of some data at which they are still working on, as some of it was shared at their conference. So all of these useful in their own way and helpful. The aspects of integrating EDI and justice in them is something that needs to be, taken seriously from the very get-go. One of the mistakes people make with these things is that sometimes they are an afterthought. I was listening to a panel recently and someone said it's about the choices we make. Sometimes the choices we make are what I would call upside down, back to front. We do not consider these issues because they are very uncomfortable. In the world, we have people always question, why should we do it? And it's heartbreaking that sometimes it takes laws to get people to do just the obvious, the very basic things that, if you were able to imagine yourself being in the other position, you know that it will be useful. And it's that behavior of not being able to imagine yourself as that other person that is most times mean that these frameworks do not address the issue fully as they can. So I think that a sort of change of behavior needs to happen where those who are setting up committees and work groups and whatever it is they do start from the very beginning to ask themselves, how equitable is this going to be? Who do we want to be part of it? Who are the target audience? I tell you something. When I was working as a patient's advocate in one of London University teaching hospitals, I had an agreement with researchers in the department in the hospital that for them to research, come and ask questions from patients to contribute into their research, they have to make a commitment that they will come back to talk to the patients about the outcome. Some of the excuses I had is that, but it takes a long time to get a research done. When we come, it might not be the same patient. That is not the point. The point is to build a relationship so that you can hear better. And also that agreement, ironic, was that you don't just send us questions for them to fill out. We want you to come, introduce your research, have a conversation about it before you send the questions. And I think for the researchers that were part of that, some of the things that learned is that they go away and redo what they have started doing. Because by talking to patients, they get a different sense of what is going on. They find out newer information, newer understanding, new insights into what they want to address. So those are some of the things that sometimes people fail to take stock of: equity, of diversity, of inclusion, of consideration to justice when they set up frameworks or works towards it. I can tell you again that for my work in eLife, we've set up something, and this is again talking about how can organizations, contribute to these things. Every little thing that people do can contribute to that. We have what we call an EDI assessment form that for my colleagues, if you setting up any projects in eLife, you have to complete that form at the very beginning and send it to my team. Our research culture manager will look through that. But it helps people. I think the point of the form is not for you to just complete the form and give to us. What we find that by completing it, you realize certain things. It helps you to reflect. It helps you to visualize. So you're going forth and back. You are seeing things differently. And usually when we get it, there's not much to do about it, but we read through it, go through it and then say to the person, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good. But how are you going to address this? Or you mentioned this because we make you think, who are your audience? What do you think could stop them from participating? By asking you these very simple questions, you are then thinking, okay, it's not quite about just setting up a project to do it. It's really who is receiving and what do you think? You are then putting yourself into their position and say, okay, what will make them not to lap up my very beautiful output? You do that. So it's very little, it's very small thing we do in one organization. But if it would be applied to various big projects, various big policies that are being put out there, and saying, who is the target? How would they take it? How would it work? Then, there'll be some better input into this framework and then better outcome and potentially more positive impact.
Got it. Final question from my side, Godwyns. You mentioned sometime in the beginning, the challenges are enormous. There is a lot to do, not just, eLife as one entity or you and few others can make this happen. So how do you keep yourself motivated? How do you keep going? Because typically if you start to think, that's how generally speaking, humans would kind of think about a very big problem, then they would not maybe make that first step, end up, procrastinating, and then go to the most immediate challenges or things that you can do or where you see tangible results, right? And so how do you really get that energy when you wake up every morning to say that, I want to really change this and I'm going to do this. I'm going to be the starting point.
I don't know how to answer that, but sometimes when we talk about motivation, it seems that various things can motivate one. When I go, I volunteer, I do a lot of voluntary work. Most of the times I give credit to my mother. I was brought up by a single mother. One of the things, my mom left me with a lot of wisdom. One of the things she told me is that if you want something to work better, go and join and make it work as you want it. So it means that most times, if things are going bad, that's when I want to be there because I want to be part of making it work the way I want to see it work. I don't believe in standing on this side and saying, it's all rubbish. If it's rubbish, then according to my mother, then I have to be there to be part of the rubbish to make it not to be rubbish. And that is one thing. I volunteer as a magistrate in the UK. The motivation is really to contribute so that people get quick justice. So in the UK, we have a judicial system that's quite interesting. We have magistrates who look after over 95% of the cases in England and Wales, but they are not lawyers. They are not trained in law. They are volunteers like me, like you. So I volunteered. I go and sit in court. You get trained for it. But the reason is because I want to see justice and I want to see it expedited because some of the time in many places, in many jurisdictions, slow justice leads to injustice. So those are some of the things. But also what motivated me to do that is I moved to the UK 20 years ago, seeing that justice sort of works, to a large extent. It's not a perfect system, but it works. Makes me think, my God, this is good. I can be part of it. And in this sphere, the thrill of seeing that people are equipped to improve, to be able to go to the next level are some of the things. So for me, it's not the negative alone, because the negative can be an inspiration to say, let me go and do it. But also every time I look out and see one thing done well, I feel happy. I also, volunteer in homelessness. And when I go to where I volunteer and we serve meal to homeless people, sometimes in a day, what makes your day is a homeless person just coming and giving you a hug. But they tell you something. Nobody has hugged me for the whole of the year. Sometimes they say, I cannot shake your hand because my hand might be dirty. And I'm like, let's shake hands. Just that little action of someone saying, you shook my hand, you touched me, you allowed me to touch you. Those are motivations because I know within me that the world can never be without problems. And therefore, I'm not aspiring to have a world reading of problems. I'm only aspiring to a world where those problems are made easier to be lived with, so that people who encounter them can do them, but not alone, have someone on their side who works side by side with them. And that applies to, all levels of life. We are here talking about academics world, where you would think people are so bright, they have PhD, they have this, they are professor of that. I was listening to one of the previous podcasts you did, and someone was saying, mental health is a real issue. Some of my editors have mental health. By the way it was put made me laugh. But it's true, nobody is 100% fully healthy. And it's also some of this we deal with the programs we run. We talk about mental health. Many researchers go through a lot of hassle. So being there to be part of finding a solution, and it's not just me, it's not just my team, it's the whole group of people we work with from you say Mexico, down to Japan, from South Africa down to Norway, all of these people, they bring great and beautiful insight. Another thing that motivates me is what I can learn from people. I'm very curious. I'm very curious to hear what someone from a different culture thinks about something that I've already thought about. And I thought, I have the whole solution. This is how I was doing to work. And someone comes along and says, oh no, if you do that and do this, or this was done this way. And you're there thinking, really, why haven't I thought about that? But you can't think of it because you didn't have the context that they have. So engaging with people, I love talking to people, as you can see. And that is the motivation. So waking up to know that I actually started my life in computing, but I left it to go into working into community engagement because I found it so boring sitting in a room typing on computers. So talking to people is fun. What you can discover, what you can learn is limitless. So that is what motivates me. But of course, the outputs of it and the challenges are very beautiful.
This has been a truly enlightening discussion with Godwyns Onwuchekwa. We've touched upon the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and how these principles can work into the open access framework. What are some of the steps needed to ensure a more equitable research ecosystem? Big thank you to you, Godwyns, for sharing such valuable insights with us today. I, for one, just flew back from a business trip today, but I was so excited to have this conversation with you. And I'm feeling really motivated, really rejuvenated having this conversation with you. Just like you, I enjoy having conversations and learning from others. And it's been such a fascinating conversation. So thank you once again for your time and for everything that you do.
Thank you, Nikesh. Thank you for having me. Hope it's useful for your audience.
In our next episode, we'll be speaking with another fascinating guest, so make sure to tune in. Thank you for being with us on Insights Exchange. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge. See you next time.